I think one of my favorite stories is how you and Mom, how Dad and Mom met. Can you tell us that story?
Yes. When I was younger and in high school, I grew up in a house on Preble Street, South Portland, and it was near Willard Beach. And I spent a lot of time at the beach, especially summers and so forth. Well, anyway, it was in the summer of 1949, and
So how old were you?
18.
18?
And so I was down the beach one night with a kid that lived, I think there was I think his family, I think it was like a hotel, and his family, they either ran it or they owned it and ran it or whatever. But anyway, and we were down there hanging around the beach, and this fellow with two girls was walking across the beach, and obviously one of the girls was with the fellow, but the other girl was obviously by herself, and I didn't know who she was. She was kind of cute, but I didn't know who she was, and so I asked this kid if he knew who she was, and he said, yeah, it was Madelyn Hall. So I said, well, she looks kind of lonely. Ought to have some company or something. And so anyway, I said to him, I'll flip a coin with you to see who gets to go talk to her. And I won.
So tell me, what was the other kid's name?
Cheryl Fair.
Cheryl Fair.
Yeah, he was a boy.
Yeah.
And I can't remember how you spelled his name, but it was Cheryl. I remember that. Came from Tennessee, I think.
And Grammy, so who were you with that day? Do you remember that day, Grammy?
Yes, I remember that day, but somehow or other I don't remember my sister and my sister Mary or Ernest being there. I just remember Jones, a girl by the name of Joan that was there, and she had a babysitting. She had to go babysitting.
No, that was afterwards.
That was the next day?
It was sometime after that.
Oh, okay.
Mary and Ernest and you, because you walked across the beach and you walked up on the point, and Cheryl and I were down by the stone wall, and I flipped a coin.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was it was later?
Well, it was sometime after that. But,
Yeah.
So you went down and introduced yourself.
I don't remember how that worked out.
Yeah, you just remember flipping the coin.
I just remember flipping the coin and
Yeah.
I won. And
So something happened that day, and then the next few days, how did that go? Grammy, seems like you did a little escape and evade for a while, as I recall. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, actually prior to me doing that escape and evade, we had been to Joanne's, somewhere where she was,
no, it wasn't.
Where she
it
was
her name
babysitting.
wasn't Joanne. It was,
well, I can't remember that girl's name, but anyhow, she was babysitting, and I was supposed to be with him,
Moore,
and, oh yeah, Janice Moore.
Janice.
And so I said to her, well, let's switch. You know, I don't know whether I just wasn't caught up with him, or maybe I think I was more attracted to this Cheryl. And so somehow during the evening we did a little switch there.
Sure did.
You and your friend?
Yeah, and,
Unbeknownst to,
Yeah.
yeah, that's funny, yeah.
and so, but in reality, the next day I was scheduled to move.
Oh, really?
I
Yeah.
was scheduled to move.
And where were you living at the time?
Down on Preble Street,
Okay.
down just below Willard Square.
Oh, okay, uh-huh, yeah.
And we were scheduled to move, in which we did move.
And
Yeah,
Then
when
what
I
happened?
went down to see her, the house was empty.
yeah.
And none of her friends would tell me where she went.
Oh, so you asked her?
Oh yeah, I did a lot of research to find her.
Yeah.
I wound up, one of her friends, all she would tell me was that they had moved down into Ferry Village. And so I had to go down to Ferry Village and scout around and talk to people and friends and so forth that I had down in the village and find out if anybody knew any families that had moved in down there. And I finally got somebody that said that they thought a family had moved in on High Street. And so I took a chance and went to the house and knocked on the door. And her sister Mary came to the door. And I asked if this was where Madelyn Hall was living. And Mary said, well, yes. And I said, oh good, it's taken me, I don't know, a couple of weeks to find you. And Mary said, she didn't tell you where we were moving? And I said, no, she didn't.
Yeah. All right, so he's now found you out, and then what happened?
Well, she did a lot of things to try to get rid of me. But the harder she tried, the more persistent I became. And her brother-in-law never really liked me anyway, I don't think.
Ernest.
No. What's his name? Natalie's husband.
Oh, Roby?
Roby Kelly. And he brought his kid brother over. Nice looking kid too, as I remember. And wanted to go bowling because he was apparently a pretty good bowler and wanted to show me out, which wouldn't have been difficult, but I didn't really bowl much anyway. And it's funny, and then her brother Bud didn't like me either because he brought guys home from the Navy to try to he brought one kid home, I remember, blonde-headed kid. His name was Duval, I think. And but I just was persistent. And I guess finally she decided that I wasn't going to give up, so she might as well give up.
Yeah. What do you remember, Grammy?
Yeah, he was persistent. He came frequently to the house and visited, and then we started going to the beach and different places like that. And he kind of grew on me, you might say.
Yeah, I guess. All right.
We moved again too from
Yeah.
that High Street, moved up on Pine Street, and that
Yeah.
time
I knew about that
he
one.
knew about that.
Yeah.
And after they moved from High Street up on the Pine Street, which is actually not very far away, but we dated through the rest of the summer, in 1949, and through the fall. She went back to school in the fall, and went to school all winter, and we dated through the winter and through the spring. in the 1950, and in the summer of 1950, we'd been dating for about a year now, and in the summer of 1950, the Korean War broke out, and I had been in the Marine Corps Reserve, and I got a notification from the government saying that they wanted my services in North Carolina, and so I think I got the notice sometime in July, and they wanted me there on August the 17th. And so we hustled around. I asked her father if we could get married. He said sure. And I can't remember whether I asked you first or not. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I just asked her father, and he said it was okay. So, but anyhow, and so then in August, we had to do some scurrying around to get, because back then you had to have blood tests, you had to have waiting periods and so forth and so on. And she was 18, so she was old enough, but I was only 19, and back then males had to be 21. And so my mother had to sign a paper giving her permission for me to get married. She was a little reluctant, but my sister Harriet told her that if I was going to be at a military base and so forth and so on, that it would be well for me to be married because military bases were notorious for problems with men and women and so forth and so on, and so anyway, we got all the licensing and all that stuff, and in August, on August the 12th, actually, a week before I was supposed to leave, we got married.
What do you remember about that time frame? Do you remember if did he ask you first, did he ask your dad first? Do you remember all?
He asked Dad first,
Or did he?
then he asked me.
So when you were first married, you moved into 537 Preble together there.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
She was a lovely lady, lovely person, very, very easy to live with as a mother-in-law, you know.
Yeah.
And because she, she just let me cook, even though I didn't know how to cook very well, but she coached me along. She cooked, and she didn't criticize anything that I cooked. As a matter of fact, she told him that no matter what I put on the table, that he should say that it was good.
Okay.
That it was good, it was good cooking, and eat it and not make any complaints. So, and she, anything I wanted to do around the home, it was okay. And she was, because she was an artist, and also she was very, very musical, and her, well, she wasn't really as interested in keeping things neat, you know. She just was more interested in doing her artwork, and that was her life, taking care of her family. And she's very conscious of having a clean kitchen, work area where you cooked, and having a clean bathroom, but basically she just pretty much let me do whatever I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And we got along quite nicely. She liked to play games. I remember playing Monopoly with her when he was off somewhere, after he came back from the service. And it was, she was comfortable to sit and chat with because
Yeah.
she had a lot of stories. I wish I had written down all the things that she talked about.
Yeah. So back up a little bit to the year prior to you were married. So you saw each other a lot during that time frame. Did you just kind of hang out, or did you actually go on some dates, some formal dates? Tell me what were some of the things you did, or some of the fun things you did, or if you look back and you say, you know, these were some good memories from the dating days.
We went to the beach a lot, didn't we?
I think so,
We
yeah.
went to the beach during the summer, and during the winter months,
I guess we went to the movies.
we
a
went
few
to the
times.
movies.
And I think we used to go to, was it Redman's Hall?
Yes,
We used to go down to Redman's Hall and they had dances.
dances, and
Uh,
nearby.
Uh-huh.
But money was scarce.
Yeah.
Money was
Worked.
tight.
And I didn't work,
Yeah.
so money was
Yeah.
scarce.
Yeah.
So I did mostly hung out at home.
Yeah. What were you doing for work at that time?
I think I worked for Seal Test Ice Cream, didn't I?
I thought you were a copy boy.
Well, I did that too.
Did-
I worked as a copy boy on the newspaper weekends.
Oh, yeah, you had two jobs.
I worked as a copy boy on the newspaper weekends, but during the week I worked at Seal Test Ice Cream, because I remember in the fall, I remember in September of 1950, right after Labor Day, I got laid off from Seal Test Ice Cream, and I remember somebody speaking to me and asking me what I was going to do. What are you going to do? You know, I've got a wife and a mother and so forth and so on. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to work for the government in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And that was just before I went to North Carolina.
Tell us about what kind of vehicles you drove during those first few years.
Oh, I think in the summer of 1950, I bought this old Plymouth. We had this old Plymouth, 1933 Plymouth it was, because I remember it was 17 years old when I bought it. And it was an old 1933 Plymouth. And we kept that for, must have kept it for a couple of years. At least 1 year, because we used to, my sister, Midge lived in Massachusetts, and I can remember we used to drive the old Plymouth to Massachusetts because it wouldn't go very fast, and of course there wasn't any interstate highways. You had to go down Route 1, and it would take us half the day to drive there, and half the day to get back because everything went so slow. And then I can't remember. Must have had that old car for at least a year or more. And then I met this guy that had a 1941 Ford. And I traded him the old Plymouth for the 41 Ford, which was probably the worst thing that anybody could probably do, was to swap a Plymouth for a Ford. But I did because it was 8 years newer, and but that thing burned oil like there was no tomorrow, and couldn't keep a fuel pump in it. And then somehow or other I met somebody that had another 41 Ford that had been setting up in his backyard for a year or so, and so I bought that from about $50, I think, and with the idea in mind of taking the engine out of it and putting it in this other 41 Ford that I had, because the one that I had the body on it was pretty good, and this other one had been setting for so long it was pretty rusty and so forth, so took the engine out of the one I had, took the engine out of the one I bought, swapped engines, and jumped out of the frying pan into the fire. Not only did this one burn as much oil, but it used up twice as many fuel pumps. And I had that, that old Ford for quite a while, and then I bought I think it was 1953, I bought a 1948 Chevrolet. That was a nice car. It was a nice car. And we had the 48 Chevy for a couple of years, I guess.
So you bought that in '53, and what did you pay for it? Remember?
$200 or $300,
Yeah.
I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, then Billy Hamilton, who lived next door, came home, and he had I think it was a '51 Buick, hardtop convertible. And so I put an ad in the paper and sold the Chevy, and I bought that Buick. I had that Buick for quite a while. Because we had that Buick quite a while. I did a valve job on it, and her sister, it was getting pretty old, and the floorboards in it were getting kind of rusty, and her sister got in it one time, put her foot down through the floorboards. I remember that.
Well, I remember the Buick.
Oh, do you?
Oh yeah, I have vivid memories of that black '51 Buick, and it had the visor over the window, and it had the little ports on the hood
Yeah.
that were just fake.
Yeah.
And I remember when you rebuilt the engine and had the parts all over the floor, and rebuilt it, put it back together. And I remember going over to Art and Frank's, where you occasionally did some part-time work, and driving that over and having them comment on how quiet it was after the rebuild job. So, and I also remember that you put some pieces of wood over the floorboards where the holes were, because I can remember lifting up the pieces of wood and throwing stuff out through the holes, and then jumping up on the back seat and seeing if I could watch it bounce down the road behind us as we would go. So yeah, I have a lot of memories of that.
I don't remember what we had after that. I had
We had 55 Chevy.
I had a,
That was a
was
fuel
it a
pump.
55 or 56?
No, it was 56, you're right.
It was a 56 Chevy. Then I had a little Plymouth that had a slant six engine in it, which was a honey of a little car.
Yeah.
And I had a Dodge.
Yeah, you skipped over it was about a 61 or
And
2 Chevy.
then we had
remember
a
that? That was when you were teaching Mom to drive in that car.
60
Yes.
or 61 station wagon.
Yeah.
And then
They had the Valiant and the Dodge, I remember
Yep.
those two.
Mhm.
And then what year was that Chevy that I bought up in Norway?
I don't remember. Nice Chevy.
Probably,
Nice car.
probably the best car we ever owned.
Uh-huh.
I can't remember what it was. It was a 1960, 1961, somewhere
Yeah,
along there.
61 or
It
62.
was a two-tone
Yeah,
green.
I remember that, two-tone green, yeah.
And I paid $700 for it. And the guy that sold it to me, you know, you always hear stories about well, this is a really nice car, it belonged to a homemade school teacher and
Right.
so forth and so on. This car actually did
Mm-hmm.
belong to an homemade school teacher
Mm-hmm.
that never took it out when it rained
Yeah.
or whatever. And the guy, he worked, at the time I bought it, he was working for the auto dealership up in Norway. But he had originally worked for a Chevrolet dealership in Lewiston. And he sold the car to this school teacher originally
Yeah.
in Lewiston. And then when he went up to Norway to go to work, then she went up there to trade with him. And it was a honey of an automobile. Like I said, probably the best one we ever owned.
That's great.
But then I traded it in 1968. I traded it for that Ford van
Yeah. That's
that we
68.
used to go
Yeah.
to California.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
So we covered basically how you met, we talked a little bit about your youth, but one of the things that you alluded to that happened that made some changes in everything was the missionaries came. So would you tell us about how it is you came to become members of the church? What church were you going to before?
We were going to the Congregational Church.
Yeah, First Congregational Church, and you went there because
That actually was the church
Where I went.
where he went.
that's where you went? Yeah.
I more or less went to the Methodist church.
Uh-huh,
when I was
okay.
younger.
Yeah.
So that was nearby. And our children went to the Congregational Church.
Yeah. I mean, I remember going to First Congregational Church. I remember singing, "Yes, Jesus Loves Me." So we were Congregationalists, and then what happened?
I'm not sure. Didn't some sister missionaries come around?
The sister missionaries came in the summer
Okay.
of
1959?
the first time the sister missionaries came was in 55 because your mother was alive.
Okay.
And they came and they visited with us for a little while. But then,
And they didn't come back?
no, I'm thinking they were transferred
I see.
and that whether their records weren't up to date or whatever, but no one came again
Uh-huh.
until it was early winter of 59.
Wow.
And then that's when Elder McClaus from Snowflake, Arizona, and his companion was Elder Beard,
No, there was somebody else
They
came
came
before
prior.
them because
Elder Jensen.
I don't remember who.
Well, a couple of missionaries came in
Uh-huh.
early winter,
Right.
but we were getting ready to leave the home. We were going somewhere.
Right.
And so, we didn't see anyone again until in the spring. I believe it was in the spring when Elder McClaus and Elder,
So they came and caught you at the door.
yes,
And-
they knocked on the door and
Yeah.
I would have let them in at that time, but we were getting ready
Yeah.
to leave.
Did you associate these missionaries with the sisters that had come in 55?
No, not really.
Yeah.
But
So this is just a couple of missionaries and
yes, they
And-
were doing that area.
Yeah.
And when they came in the spring, I let them in because my sister Phyllis was dating a Jack Mormon.
oh,
At least that's what he said he was.
yeah.
And she was dating him,
Yeah.
and I wanted to know. They told me they were from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormons. They said, and I
Right.
said, "Oh, come on in." You
Yeah.
know.
Oh, that's interesting. So do you remember who it was that she was dating?
Oh yes, we had Thanksgiving dinner with him. I can't remember his name right now off the top of my
Okay.
head. Yeah, she dated him. Very nice young fellow, but that's what he said. I'm assuming it was because word of wisdom.
Yeah,
More
sure.
than anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so you had these missionaries come. It was in the spring of 59 or
I think it was
60?
in the spring because you were working, you were working nights, weren't you?
I was working nights and they woke me up.
Well, he had always said to me, don't let anyone in.
Yeah.
Threatened her within an inch of her life if she ever let any males in.
No, don't let him in.
Yeah.
When I wasn't there or when I was.
Yeah.
And I was working nights and I awakened to the sound of male voices. And I was pretty upset.
Yeah.
And I came storming downstairs and scared him to death.
But they had given me, they were teaching me.
Yeah.
They would teach me. And they had,
Was that the first lesson?
yeah,
Yeah.
they
So they came
they
in and
sat down at the table and they asked me if they could, actually, they asked me an interesting question. They said, would you like to know, could we tell you about the American Indian?
oh yeah.
Could we tell you the origin of? And I
Yeah.
said, yeah, because I had always been fascinated by the Indians.
Yeah.
And wondered how they came to be. And so I said, sure. And they folded a piece of paper, an 8 by, in 3 sections. And they do stick pictures, they do.
That's little stick figures.
They stick figures, and that's how I got the first discussion. They drew these pictures and told me about Lehigh, and it was I thought it was quite nice. And
So did Dad interrupt the discussion?
so when he came down, they were getting ready to leave, and so they asked me if I wanted. Oh, they wanted to leave the Book of Mormon with me.
Yeah.
You remember? What'd you say to them? How much?
I asked him how much.
He was,
And he said 50 cents. And I said, but you'll take more. And they said, no, 50 cents is enough. And I said, but you'll take more. And they took more.
well, they weren't going to stand there and argue with you.
No. I think I gave him $1.
Yeah.
Well, back then, $1 was a lot of money.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So you had that first discussion, which you really weren't part of, or
No.
yeah.
But you were nice to him when you came down?
No,
You
No,
were a
he
little...
wasn't.
No,
no,
no.
they woke me up.
And she hadn't been in the
He
house?
had worked all night. He'd worked all
And
night.
then in the house.
But you at least gave him $1, or at least,
Yeah, I wanted to get rid of them.
Yeah.
All right.
But that was it was a facetious thing. You
I
were,
see.
Yeah.
yeah, you'll take more though, right?
But they came back. They came back.
Okay, so continue with the story. So you had your first
Next 2
lesson.
years they came back.
Well, I know that, yeah. So
They, he sat in, on the discussions. But what happened was,
They used to bring the greenies up to train them on me.
I know it, that was interesting. See, the children were going, I was taking the children to the Congregational Church and for Sunday school. And then in the evening, we went to because that's when the church had
right, split sacrament.
split
Sunday,
sacrament. Then in the evening, we'd go to the Mormon church, the Latter-day Saint church. And I took them. And on Wednesday for primary, I would take them to primary. One particular Sunday, Nancy came home. They had given her a test in her class, and she was very upset because in primary she had learned that God and Jesus were two separate were separate.
Right.
And so the test that they gave her, it was the question they asked was about God and Jesus being one. And she
At the
put,
Congregational Church?
yes,
Yeah.
and she put false. She put no,
Right.
and so they of course marked it wrong. And she came home and she said, why? She said, why did they mark that wrong? She said. And so he said, Madeline, we need to make up our mind. Are the children going to go to the Congregational Church, or are they going to the Latter-day Saint Church? So anyhow, I started taking the children there, and we went. But he was still being taught for those 2 years.
Doesn't make any difference to me where I went. They're all the same as far as I'm concerned.
That was how he felt,
One's just good as the other.
until he finally, you see,
So for 2 years,
yeah,
this
they
went
came-
on?
Oh, yeah, we
Yeah.
had some great times.
I remember, we used to have big parties.
We used
Yeah.
to have big parties. We had 40 missionaries in one night.
40?
No.
20 companionships. They came for the zone conference.
Oh, they came for the zone conference, yes, we were really packed in there. But back then, the missionary program wasn't stepped up at the speed it is today.
Right.
So you challenge them at a certain point in time, and then more or less the members go from there to fellowship. And isn't that how you do it now?
Yeah.
But back then, they kept coming, one step right after another, as long as you let them come to your home. And so they came for 2 years. I think in my opinion, see, I read the Book of Mormon and I knew it was true. I hardly got.
So tell us about that. So tell us about that. So
Well, they gave me the Book of Mormon, and I started reading, and really, you couldn't put it down. It was really wonderful.
so you know right off the bat.
Yeah, because it answered all those questions
Yeah.
that I had in my mind through the years, as a child even, trying to comprehend a God that was everywhere and yet,
Yeah, nowhere. and
Nowhere.
So
and so it was just wonderful for me.
Did you
But-
consider getting baptized without him, or
Oh,
wanting to get baptized?
The
or
missionaries discouraged
dividing the family?
dividing the family back then. It was discouraged. It has only been the past, well, I don't know when they started baptizing whomever would agree, husband or wife, but they didn't, they just kept coming until he, now.
Did he drag his feet, or did he? It was just a
No,
process.
I just said, hey, I take the kids to the Congregational Church and they learn one thing, and you take them someplace else and they learn something else, and it won't be very long before they'll be so confused they won't believe in anything. So I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. One church is just as good as another. They're all the same,
Do you need to
as
tell them?
far as I'm concerned.
But when did you read, I don't remember when you read the Book of Mormon and really prayed about it to know that it was true.
Oh, I don't know, it was long after that.
Was.
Oh, yeah, a long time. 2, 3 years.
Even after you were baptized,
Yeah,
before you really had a testimony?
long time.
Hmm. That I really often wondered, I never really did ask him that question, when he, because for me,
so you knew within weeks after getting a copy of the Book of Mormon.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, I did.
And you, Papa, went. You
Well, I taught Sunday school at the Congregational Church, and they were good people.
Yeah.
I was an officer in my Masonic Lodge, which taught the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, and care for the widows and orphans and so forth, and they were good people, real good people. And all of my circle of friends were good people. And I didn't have any questions about the Godhead or anything else.
Accepted.
It never, I didn't have those kind of questions.
right,
I wasn't confused about it.
right, yeah.
And when the missionaries taught, you didn't see a difference between the religions?
They taught this lesson, and they said, what would you do in this case? And we were supposed to say I'd give up smoking, but I didn't smoke. And And then they went on to another portion of it, and the answer was, well, I have to give up drinking, but I didn't drink. And then went on to another portion of the thing, and I'd have to give up coffee, but I didn't drink coffee. And the next thing was tea, and the only time I ever drank any tea was when I was in the service out in the woods, stomping around in the middle of the summer, and they brought the trucks out with the big 40-quart cans of iced tea.
Iced tea, yeah.
And that's the only time I ever drank any tea. So I didn't drink coffee, I didn't smoke, I didn't drink. So the word of wisdom didn't affect me any. I had none of those problems.
Right.
Went to church every Sunday, associated with good people,
And he liked the church that he was going to?
and good people.
Mhm.
Sid Walton. I had Sid Walton when I was little, was my Sunday school teacher. He was my Boy Scout leader. He was really a good man. And they were all nice people.
What then persuaded you to get baptized and switch over? Just so that you could,
So that we'd have uniformity.
yeah, okay. Yeah. So what was your first calling in the?
Oh,
in
when
the
did they
church?
get baptized then?
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
tell what
Yeah.
baptism?
And who baptized
March
you?
of 1962.
Pardon?
March
March
1962.
62. And who baptized you?
Mike Jepson.
Both of you?
No.
Mike Jepson baptized me and Bob C. was baptized her.
And then Nancy and Len, or at least Nancy,
Nancy's baptized, huh?
I don't,
I wasn't baptized,
not then.
for a year because
Yeah.
he was 7.
62. Nancy was 11.
Yeah.
He
You
was
would have been
only
7.
6.
in March, yeah.
And then when you turned 8 later, then you were
Yeah.
baptized.
So you were baptized, and then the missionaries continued to come, or did that drop off?
No,
No, they kept coming.
they
Yeah,
kept coming.
that's what I've called,
Yeah.
for a long time.
Long time.
Do you remember what your first calling was?
I've had so many. I don't remember. Was it,
It was in mutual.
yeah, that's what I think it was in the mutual.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it was it young men's president or counselor or something. It was in the mutual.
Yeah. All right. So you remember Mom gaining a testimony just by reading the Book of Mormon,
Well, you know, I had to pray about it.
right?
You know,
Uh-huh.
and.
But that happened for you very early in the process.
Yes, because I had a lot of, I wondered about a lot of
Yeah.
things that I'd been taught as a child.
Mhm.
You know.
And Papa, what about you? When did you gain a testimony?
I don't know, 2 or 3 years, I guess. And something came up that I was very humbled about, and I had to have some help, and I couldn't find any place, and so I got down on my knees, and I got the help I was looking for, and so I said, you know, gee, I guess there is something to this after all.
Do you remember about when that was?
1965.
Yeah. So I was thinking, okay.
And members fellowshipped you, and you found friends in the ward. And
Yes.
They did her, they didn't bother with me very much.
I had a lot of, as a matter of fact, they called me into Relief Society right away. And,
Okay.
But I, see, back then, they had split meetings.
Right.
They had Sunday school and the
I remember
priesthood
that.
in the morning
Yeah.
and the sacrament at night. But I worked every Sunday from 3 to 11.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went in the morning, but I never went at night.
After you joined the church and you were members of the church for some period of time, at what point did you start thinking about or making plans to go to the temple? Or how did that come up?
We must have started around 1965
Well,
or thereabouts.
everybody, that's all everybody ever talked about anyway.
Okay.
From the day you were baptized was going to the temple, but the nearest temple for us was 3,000 miles away.
Yeah.
And so, with it that far away, even though there have been people in other areas that have probably traveled farther, but you know, it did take some planning and time and money and so forth. But I probably started getting real serious about it in 1965, and then I was I can't remember. I was terminal manager for a small terminal for the express company in Brunswick for a while, and then they wanted me to go to Lewiston, which I didn't really want to do, but I did. I took the job as terminal manager in Lewiston, and then I was there from about 1966 maybe to summer of 1968 when everything went well. We had money, we had
How much money did we have? Not very much, $500.
how many?
Did we have $500?
Something like that.
Not much more than that when we left.
But back then, $500 was considered, you could buy considerably more with it than
sure.
you can today.
Mhm.
And we bought a new car. Bought a big van. And I modified it some and put some sheets of plywood in it so that we could make some beds in it so we could sleep and so forth and so on. And we started out and we went, I guess we got as far as New York when we realized that we had left our temple recommends at home on the buffet in the compote. And so what was his name? Weeks?
Weeks.
Anyway, there was a fellow in the branch, I can't remember his first name, his last name was Weeks, but anyway, he had a sister that lived in Salt Lake. And so I called him up and asked him, I said, if I tell you how to break into my house, will you go to my house? And I told him where the temple recommends were, and get the recommends and put them in an envelope and mail them to your sister. And then when we get to Salt Lake, you can go to your sister's house and pick them up. And so we did that. And then we just continued on. It took us, what, 5 days?
5
I
days.
think it took us 5 days to get there.
That's because we camped out. We stopped
We
in.
stopped at night.
I remember visiting the Wakefields in Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
That was on the way back.
Oh, was that on the way back?
Yeah, that
Oh,
one
okay.
We chose to come up that way.
I see, yeah. I couldn't remember if it was on the way out or on the way back. But, yeah. Okay. All right, so 5 days out. So we arrived in Salt Lake, and where did you go first?
First went to this fellow's sister to get our temple records.
Right?
And then
Then we went to the Jepsons
we went to Mike Jepson.
and stayed
Yeah.
for, and
Did we stay with them?
Yes, we stayed with them, so that he could go to the temple with us.
Yeah. I couldn't remember. I've been trying to think where we stayed while we were there.
We stayed there,
I have some recollection of sleeping in
on the
his house
floor,
on
on
the
the
floor.
mat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we stayed at the Jepsons and she was pregnant and she was so sick. She was so nauseous. It was really tough having house guests. She was so sick. But they went to the temple with us.
And the Salt Lake Temple was closed
Right.
for
Cleaning.
painting or something, and so we had to go up to Logan. As
Which
a
is
matter of fact, I
wonderful.
think Logan was the only temple that was open at the time.
Mhm.
Wasn't,
And it was live, not film. It
it
was
was
live,
a live session.
which
Yeah.
is good.
Yeah, it was kind of a, kind of a unique experience. It was a very large group, as I recall. It must have been
Over 100.
well over 100 people in the session, and the officiator said he'd like everybody who traveled more than 100 miles to get there to stand up, and so 2/3 of the people and then he said, I'd like everybody who traveled less than 500 miles to sit down. And a lot of people sat down. And then he said, I'd like everybody who traveled less than 1,000 miles to sit down. And some more people sat down. And then he said, everybody that has traveled less than 1,500 miles sit down, and a few more sat down. And then 2,000 miles and a few people sat down. And 2,500 people, anybody traveled more than 2,500 miles, and some more sat down. And then I think there was only a couple of people standing up, and then he said, I'd like everybody who traveled less than 3,000 miles to sit down, and everybody sat down but us. We were the only ones left standing.
There was a big group,
And it was,
Wow.
it was a big group.
and it was amazing how many people had traveled
Yeah.
that far.
Yeah.
Because
And then he's,
And what was your total that you had actually traveled?
oh,
what was it? Was it?
it was over 3,000 miles
Yeah. Yeah.
to get there, but then the whole trip was something like 6,000 miles because
Yeah.
we went on to
Went out
California,
of California
after
back
that.
on.
But the unique thing about that experience was, the really unique thing was that it was our first time.
Mm-hmm.
It was a live session, and we were the witness couple.
Oh, wow.
That was kind of, I was quite timid,
Yeah.
you know, because it was
Oh,
the
yeah.
first time going to the temple, and
We had to be the witness.
hadn't gone
Yeah.
hadn't gone through a session ever,
Yeah.
and we were the witness couple.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite a neat experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I just was so amazed at how many, the large session that temple was full to overflowing,
Mm-hmm.
and
And you guys went to the nursery, Lynn, do you remember being in the temple while they
Yeah.
were?
they did.
Yeah.
And when I think it was the temple president that married us,
Mhm.
because afterwards he took us to this area where there was a window, and he said, come over here and look out this window and see how high up you've come,
We've traveled.
because as you went through the session, you kept going up.
Right.
As you know.
Yeah.
So what was it like when they brought the kids in, when you were actually sealed?
Oh.
Describe that.
Right.
That was a unique experience also, because Becky had her blanket, which she would not give up, and that blanket came in to the ceiling room and
And they set her right on the altar with her
with her
blanket.
blanket.
Yeah.
Describe how old each of the kids were at that time.
Nancy was 17. Yeah, Nancy
Yeah,
was
17.
17. And Leonard was 12. And Heidi was 7 or 8. And Becky
Yeah, she
was
was 8.
about 3.
No, I think she was 2.
2, Becky
I
was
think
2.
she was 2.
Yeah.
Because they picked her up and they sat her on that, with her
Had you
blanket.
had to bring white clothes yourself, or did the temple
They
provide clothes for
provided
the
it.
kids?
Provided it.
Oh, and they were beautiful clothes. Oh, they just looked so beautiful when they came in that room. And you know, it's interesting that before we left the Jepsons, she had dragged that blanket with her across the country, and it was dirty. And I said to Carol, I said, I really need to wash this blanket. You know, she sucked her thumb and had that blanket that she rubbed on her face, and she said, sure. So she put it in and she washed it, she bleached it. So it was white, because it was a white blanket to begin with, but it looked nice, it looked good. So when they brought her up, afterwards, the sister that was in charge of the children, she said there was no way that we were going to get her up here without that blanket. And we decided that it was white, it was okay.
Yeah, I remember her saying that. I remember her saying,
Yeah,
hey, we decided the blanket was white, so why not?
yeah, there was no way they were gonna get her up there.
So
That
I
was
remember that blanket being piled on top of the pile of hands.
Yes, it was, yeah. Yeah, that was a nice experience.
So,
Yeah.
who was there for your sealing? Obviously, Mike Jepson. Any of the other missionaries that had come over time?
Not that I know of.
No, it was just Mike,
Okay.
Mike and his wife, and of course the temple president.
Okay. Do you remember who else witnessed besides? I would assume Mike was one of the witnesses.
There's a name on the certificate,
Yeah.
but it was somebody that they picked out.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So you were sealed, and then they brought the children in, and then we were all sealed together. Was that the end of your temple day that day, or was there more temple work that you did that day?
No, that was in, because it
That
took
was
the
in.
whole day.
Okay.
We got there early and it took,
Yeah.
oh, it was a long day,
Oh, it was a live session,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
it took the whole day.
On your trip, did you go to the temple more than one time? Like in California or another Utah? temple or
California, they were closed for cleaning also. We would like to have gone in California, but they were closed. And so we didn't, when we visited with my sister in Van Nuys, I believe that's where she lived, yeah. We went and we just visited it, we just,
Went to the temple grounds.
yeah,
I remember doing that.
that temple grounds.
So did you get back to the Logan Temple while you were still in Utah? Did you do any other temple work?
No, because we left, after we returned to Mike Jepson's home, and within a day or two, we left for California.
Okay.
He had a month's
Yeah.
vacation,
Yeah.
and we had used 5 days
Right.
to come across the country. And so we needed to, I was expected at my sister's. We spent a few days with her, and then we went on to Carmel
Right.
and spent a couple of days with Elder Serban,
Mm-hmm.
who was one of the last missionaries there that we were so attached to. And we visited a little bit with him. And then we just headed up from there to Wisconsin.
No, we went from there to Sequoia.
Oh, we camped
Yes.
out in the Sequoias.
And then up to Sequoia,
Yeah.
and then they came back through, I guess it's Nevada.
Oh, yeah,
You remember the Ticklebelly Hills?
absolutely, yeah. I don't know how fast you were driving, but,
Faster than I was supposed to.
I do remember that. It was, that'll be an always memory, driving through the tree. That
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah, that was,
Yeah, seeing some of those big waterfalls.
that was a wonderful and a great experience,
Yeah.
that first trip to the temple. Yeah.
So when did you get back to the temple after that?
1971, I think, when the
Uh-huh.
Washington Temple opened.
Okay, all right. So, and at that point, did you go back with family names in hand, or did you just go back? Your first trip back, was it just a trip to the temple and you took names that were there?
I think so.
The first trip, we just did names that were there because it wasn't until the second trip that I began to really, I had all of the data.
Right.
It was just a matter of getting it on
Uh-huh.
sheets and getting
Yes.
it to the temple, because back then there wasn't the floppy disk thing
Right,
that you
right,
said.
right, yeah.
And I can't remember which trip was it that we went and you were sealed to your mother and father, because we didn't do that when we went
Yeah.
the first
I
time.
don't remember.
It was it was one of the early trips
Yeah.
that you decided to be sealed to your mother and father.
What was that like?
That was a really unique experience, because we had previously sent in the paperwork, and they notified us when we got there to do the work, to go to the family file desk, and they would have everything ready. So we went to the family file desk and gave them all the names and the information, and they never heard of us.
Wow.
They had nothing whatsoever. And so I explained to them, that we had sent in all the data and so forth and so on. And so they searched around, and I guess they finally came up with the paperwork.
Back up just a little bit, because he needs, this important to what you're telling him, is that when we were on the bus trip,
Right.
and there was an elderly lady there. Her name was Sister Buckland.
Mhm.
She was over 80. She was going the first time
Wow.
to be sealed to her husband. And when you get off that bus and go in the temple, everybody goes their own way. And so all the members of the Portland Ward, they were going busy, they were anxious to get in to do their work and so forth. And she's there. And so she didn't know what to do. So I took her by the arm and I went with her. This was her first time. And so I was with her for her instruction and helping her and going through her endowment session and her sealing with her husband. So I wasn't with him.
Mhm.
I wasn't able, he had to go, he went through that, you remember, by yourself.
Well, anyhow,
Yes, go ahead.
they finally, I guess, came up with the paperwork, but they still didn't have a sealer, they didn't have any witnesses, they didn't
Wow.
have anybody, proxies and so forth and so on. And so they finally put together a team, they got a sealer, and they finally got 2 witnesses, and then there was a couple a man and a woman that was there from California. I don't remember their names, but they were visiting from California, and they acted as proxies for my mother and father. And they did the sealing. And then the really neat thing, now remember, this sealing team was put together on the spur of the moment. The proxy couple were
So nobody you knew?
California. Nobody there knew me or anything about me. And after the sealing was performed, I stood up away from the altar, and it was kind of like a gray mist. And my mother spoke to me. And I know it was my mother, because she said to me, "Oh, Bumps, I'm so pleased." And there wasn't anybody there who could possibly have known my nickname.
It was interesting that at this time, I wanted to be there to be the proxy, and it was interesting how the perception that these temple workers have, because this one lady, ordinance worker, she came to me. I was with Sister Buckland, and we were getting ready to go up for her to be sealed to her husband. And she looked at me, all of a sudden she looked at me and she said, "I perceive that you would like to be somewhere else." And I kind of looked at her and I thought, I wonder how she knows that.
Yeah.
You know. And then I told her, I said, my husband is probably being sealed to his mother, and that was it kind of gave me a little bit of an insight on the inspiration.
Yeah.
I love to see the temple. I'm going there someday to